The wind had stopped howling just before dawn, but it left behind a silence too sharp to trust. Everything was too still, the kind of stillness that comes before something breaks. Michaela Nataani stood ankle-deep in frozen earth, gripping a hatchet slick with pitch, her breath misting in front of her like smoke from an old pipe. The sky was bruised with morning, but no light came through the clouds. The frost hadn't lifted in days, and the firewood was running low. She swung the hatchet again. The crack of dry piñon rang like a gunshot. From behind her came the crunch of small boots. Mama whispered Lana her daughter only 8, but already aged in the eyes. Jace heard something. Michaela didn't lower the blade. What kind of something? He said. It sounded like thunder. Lana clutched a kindling bundle in her arms. Her hands were red and raw where the cuffs of her coat rode up. Michaela's heart stuttered. Thunder didn't come in January. Not this deep in the Chama River forest. Go back inside, she said, voice tight. Lock the door behind you. Lana didn't argue. She never did when the wind changed like this. Michaela stayed still, listened. There, low and distant, a sound like hoofbeats over ice, and then silence. Not even birdsong. The forest held its breath. Her stomach tensed around the unborn child inside her. She pressed her palm over the baby, then turned to face the trees. They stood dense and skeletal at the edge of the clearing, black against the gray snow. Somewhere beyond them, someone was watching. She could feel it like teeth grazing the back of her neck. She yanked the last log free from the chopping block, bundled the wood under one arm, and stepped through the door, bolting it behind her. The hogan was dim and smelled of smoke and sage. Jace sat beside the hearth, his cheeks smudged with ash. Was it thunder? He asked in a whisper. Could have been, she said. Could have been a badger, too. But badgers don't walk on 2 feet. She didn't answer. Michaela crouched by the fire, feeding the fresh wood into its belly. Her hands trembled more than they should have. She hated that the children could see it. They'd seen enough fear since their father died. It had been 7 months since the mine collapsed. 7 months since she'd buried Luis under a marker of stone and prayer, her belly barely showing and her children too quiet. The company had sent condolences and nothing else. No proper pay. No truth. Just a long silence like the kind outside right now. And then came the scream. Not an animal, not a hawk. A human sound. Ragged. Wounded. Michaela stood up so fast she nearly overturned the stew pot. Lana grabbed her sleeve. Mama, was that stay with your brother? Michaela reached for the rifle Luis had left behind, checked the rounds, slung it over her shoulder. Don't open the door for anyone but me. She pulled on her husband's old coat, now snug over her belly, and stepped back into the cold. The cry had come from the creek eastward. The path was narrow and crusted in snow branches clawing at her sleeves. The air was thick with that high mountain scent of ice and pine resin. Every crunch of her boots felt like a warning. Then she saw it. Half buried in a drift, crumpled beside a downed cedar, lay a man. A big one. Unmoving. She approached slowly, rifle raised. The snow around him was stained dark blood, thick and old. A wound in his left shoulder had frozen into his coat. His hair was black and tangled, his beard heavy with ice. He looked like he'd fallen from the cliffs and been swallowed by the woods. She crouched beside him. His skin was burning with fever. His breath came in vaporous gasps, shallow but steady. His hand twitched. Not dead. Alive. Michaela's eyes fell to his boots, worn smooth but high quality. His belt buckle was hand-stamped silver. His coat was deerskin stitched with precision, not rough frontier work. His hands were calloused, yes, but clean. Fingernails trimmed. There was something in that. something that didn't fit the picture of a fugitive or a hunter. But then again, nothing in this winter made sense. She reached into the satchel slung over his back. A canteen, a knife, a folded piece of parchment worn and soft as skin. She opened it. Her breath caught. A wanted poster. $800. Reward dead or alive. His name Thomas Tenorio. Crimes murder, arson, assault on officers. She stared at the sketch. It was him. Younger. Clean-shaven. Still unmistakable. $800. $800 would pay off what Luis owed the company. Would buy her children food, medicine, a mule to haul firewood, a future. Her breath fogged the air again, and she could see her fingers trembling. Not from cold this time. The rifle weighed heavy on her shoulder. The bounty paper fluttered in the wind like a taunt. She looked down at the man. His face was twisted in pain, but peaceful too, somewhere between dreaming and dying. His lips moved. She leaned closer. "No more killing," he mumbled. "Not for him. Not for them." His voice cracked low and hoarse. "I won't. Do it again." Michaela pressed her hand to her chest. He wasn't begging. He was repenting. She knelt in the snow, pulled the sled around from where it leaned against a tree. It was meant for firewood, not bodies, but it would hold. She hoisted him onto it, grunting with the strain. He was built like a bear. She turned and whistled once sharp. Lana answered with 2 whistles from the door. "I'm bringing someone," Michaela called. "Don't be afraid." Together with her daughter, they hauled the sled back across the clearing. Jace peeked from behind the curtain, wide-eyed. Inside, they cleared a space near the fire. Michaela cut away the bloodied coat, checked the wound. It had clotted with filth, frost, and torn leather. She boiled water. She reached for the yarrow and golden seal in her basket. She cleaned and packed the injury as best she could. Later, while Lana brewed willow bark tea, and Jace sat silently with a quilt clutched to his chest, Michaela placed the wanted poster in the hearth fire. She watched the edges curl, blacken, and turn to ash. If the mountain wanted him dead, she murmured it would have finished the job. But it didn't. Behind her, the fire popped, and the man named Thomas stirred. His eyes opened moss-green, distant but sharp. She didn't speak. He blinked. "Ma'am," he rasped. "Am I alive?" She folded the rag she'd been using, barely. He nodded as if that was more than he expected. Then his eyes drifted closed again. And for the first time in weeks, Michaela Natani felt something like warmth settle in the room. Not comfort, not safety. Just a flicker of heat in the middle of winter. But outside, the snow began to fall again, quiet and steady. And in the far trees, something moved. The wood stove in the center of the cabin hissed and snapped, trying its best to keep the cold from settling into the bones of the place. Rain slicked against the windows, and the wind moaned like it was mourning something out in the trees. Clara stood with her arms crossed tight across her chest, not because of the cold, but because her heart was shaking harder than her body. She hadn't spoken since the man Tobias she now knew had come back inside. He hadn't tried to make conversation, just brought in an armload of wood, stoked the fire, and sat at the table with a chipped mug of something steaming. His presence filled the room like the smell of pine smoke, earthy, quiet, unavoidable. She watched him now, noticed the nick on his jaw that looked like it came from barbed wire, the thick cords of his forearms tanned from years under sun and wind. His boots were still damp, his jeans stained at the knees. This wasn't a man who lived gently, but he hadn't raised his voice, not when he'd found her, not when she'd shaken like a wild animal and told him she was in labor, not even when she'd refused to say who the father was. "You're still mad at the world," he said finally, not looking up from his mug. His voice was low, calm. "That's allowed. But the world doesn't care either way." That's the trick. She turned her head slowly, unsure if she was supposed to answer. Her voice still felt fragile like glass that had been dropped too many times. I'm not mad at the world, she said quietly. I'm mad at people who pretend they're better than they are. He nodded once slow, like he'd been expecting that. People will do what they can get away with, but they can't hide what's true for long. Not out here. She didn't reply. Her gaze dropped to the bundle of blankets on the cot beside the stove. The baby was quiet now, belly full of goat's milk and sleep. Her cheeks were flushed pink. Clara had whispered to her in the night, promising things she wasn't sure she could give. Promising they'd be safe. You're not from the mountain, Tobias said after a long pause. No, town east, she replied, and then more firmly, far. He glanced at her. Far can be good. If you're running from something that ought to stay behind. I didn't run, she said too fast. I just stopped going back. Tobias didn't press. He stood and crossed the room, poured another cup from the tin kettle. He offered it to her wordlessly. She took it with a shaking hand, the steam wrapping around her face like a soft shroud. It tasted of strong black tea and something faintly sweet honey, maybe. It soothed more than her throat. He pulled a chair out and sat across from her elbows on the table. You got a name, Clara. That baby yours, she nodded. Her name's Lily. Pretty name. Clara looked at him, trying to read the shape of him. His eyes were dark-shadowed with something old and heavy. He didn't smile much. There was a scar that traced the side of his neck and disappeared under his shirt. But he hadn't asked anything unkind, hadn't looked at her the way most men did when they saw a woman alone. He'd just helped. She wasn't supposed to come yet, Clara said, voice brittle. She didn't wait. No, she never has. A small silence fell between them. Outside, the wind surged again, rattling the shutters. I don't got much, Clara, he said after a while. Just this place and the quiet. But if you need to stay warm, stay fed, this cabin's better than the trail. She didn't know how to answer. The offer was plain, but not pitying. There was no edge to his tone, just fact, like he was stating the weather. I don't want to cause trouble. You already didn't. She looked away. I had nowhere to go. The folks I stayed with turned me out when they saw I wasn't going to marry. Said I'd bring shame. Tobias stirred slightly but didn't speak. I was staying in the church basement. Then I heard them whispering. They were going to call someone. Take her away. Your daughter. She nodded and tears came sharp and quick. They think a girl with no ring and no husband can't love her baby right. His voice cut through the air, then quiet, but sharp as a blade. You got shame if you leave your child, not if you fight to keep her. That stopped her breath for a moment. She hadn't expected to hear it said like that. Not from a stranger. Not in a place like this. She looked up at him, truly looked. He wasn't old, but something in his eyes was. Like he'd seen enough loss to know when something was worth holding on to. I thought I'd have time, she whispered. I thought maybe the father might come find us. He said he would. Tobias didn't laugh, didn't scoff. Just watched her with something steady in his expression. They say words easy, he said. The ones who mean 'em don't always say 'em fast, but they show up. He didn't. Then that tells you everything. She closed her eyes, biting her bottom lip. Her hand curled protectively over her belly even though it was flat now. She could still feel the ghost of the weight, the ache of what she'd carried alone. Why are you helping me, she asked, not accusing, just tired. He leaned back the chair, creaking. Because you needed help. That's enough for me. No one else thought so. then they weren't worth your sorrow. The rain eased outside, the hiss softening against the roof. Clara glanced over at Lily, who stirred and made a soft squeak like a bird dreaming. Something cracked in Clara, then not in a breaking way, but like a seal popping open after too long. A breath she hadn't let out since she fled that church, since the contractions started, since the world turned on her like a slammed door. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "Neither do I most days. You live alone up here, some folks call it that." She raised an eyebrow. "I call it peace." He stood then slowly and took her empty mug. "You ought to rest while you can. I'll tend the goats, chop wood. If she wakes, holler. I hear everything in this cabin." Clara didn't answer right away, just watched him move toward the door coat already slung over his arm. Before he stepped outside, she said it low but clear. "Thank you, Tobias." He paused with his hand on the doorframe, gave a slight nod. The door closed behind him, and Clara sat in the hush, heart slowed for the first time in weeks. The baby snuffled in sleep, the fire crackled steady, and the sound of the wind was no longer cruel. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, eyes tracing the worn floorboards, the thick beams overhead, the hand-hewn table. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long while she didn't feel like she was falling. She felt kept, and she whispered it to herself, as if saying it made it true. We're not alone anymore. Outside, the mountain held its silence, but the cabin was no longer empty. Morning crept into the hogan the way it always did in winter, slow, gray, and cautious, as if the light itself wasn't sure it was welcome. Michaela woke before the children, her back stiff from sleeping half upright by the fire. For a moment, she didn't remember why she'd done that. Then she heard the shallow, uneven breathing from the pallet near the hearth, and felt the weight return to her chest. The man was still alive. She rose quietly, easing herself up with one hand braced against the table. The baby shifted inside her, a small, insistent reminder that nothing in her life belonged only to her anymore. She crossed the room and knelt beside the pallet. Thomas Tenorio lay on his side now, sweat darkening his hair despite the cold. The fever had not broken, but it had softened. His breathing was steadier. The wound in his shoulder was angry and red, but not bleeding. Michaela pressed the back of her fingers to his cheek. Still hot. Still fighting. She turned away to stir the embers and add a split log. The fire caught with a low pop. Outside, the wind scraped along the walls, and somewhere far off, a crow called once and went quiet. Mama Lana whispered from the sleeping mat. "I'm here," Michaela said softly. Lana sat up, pulling her blanket around her shoulders. "Is he?" "Yes," Michaela said. "For now." Jace rolled over and blinked at the ceiling beams. "Is he bad?" The question was so simple it nearly hurt. "I don't know yet," she answered honestly. "But being hurt isn't the same as being bad." Jace considered this, then nodded as if filing it away for later use. Michaela set water to boil and began crushing dried yarrow with the stone pestle. Her movements were careful, practiced. She had learned this work from her grandmother, who used to say that the body understood when you meant to help it. That intention mattered. Behind her, Thomas stirred. She felt it before she heard it, that subtle shift in the air when someone wakes and realizes they are not alone. She turned slowly. His eyes were open now, clearer than they had been the night before. Moss green, alert despite the fever. They tracked the room, the children, the rifle by the door. Then they settled on her. "You're still here," he rasped. "So are you," she said. "That makes us even." He tried to push himself up and failed, a sharp hiss escaping his teeth. His hand went instinctively toward his waist where a gun should have been. Finding nothing, he stilled. You took my weapons. Yes. A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Not anger. Calculation. That was wise, he said quietly. Michaela folded her arms. You're in my home. With my children. I don't take chances. Fair. He swallowed, then glanced toward Lana and Jace. How many too? Another on the way. His gaze dropped briefly to her belly, then returned to her face. Something softened there. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. I owe you my life, he said. You owe me the truth, she replied. Silence stretched. The fire crackled. Jace shifted closer to Lana. Tomas exhaled slowly. My name is Tomas Tenorio. I know, Michaela said. I saw the paper. That landed. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again, resignation settling over his features like dust. And yet he said, I'm still breathing. For now. A corner of his mouth twitched. You burned it. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He studied her with new attention. You didn't ask why. I don't need a story yet, she said. I need to know if you'll endanger my children. No, he said immediately. Too quickly. She raised an eyebrow. I won't, he corrected, not knowingly. But danger follows me. That part I won't lie about. Why he shifted, wincing. Because some men don't like the truth when it costs them money. Michaela felt the words settle into her bones. My husband, she said carefully, died in a mine collapse last spring. Thomas's eyes sharpened. Where south of here? Near the old Arietta claim. His jaw tightened. He looked away toward the fire. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. I was a sheriff once, he said. Before the truth made me a hunted man. The words hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Lana leaned forward despite herself. A real sheriff. Thomas glanced at her, then nodded. Deputy sheriff. Tribal and territorial. Depends who you ask. Why would they hunt a sheriff? Jace asked. Michaela put a hand on his shoulder. That's enough. No, Thomas said gently. It's all right. He drew a careful breath. Because I wouldn't do what they asked. And what was that? Michaela said. Look away, he replied. Sign papers that said men died by accident. Swear under oath that rotten beams were sound and bad air was nobody's fault. Michaela's chest tightened. She thought of Luis coming home with coal dust in his hair and worry in his eyes. Thought of the letters he'd written when the baby kept her up at night. Letters she'd folded and hidden in a tin beneath the floorboard. You're saying I'm saying the mine didn't fall? Thomas said. It was pushed. The fire popped loudly. Lana flinched. They killed men for profit, he went on. And when my wife helped document it, when Ruth drew the maps and marked the collapses, they burned our home to the ground. Michaela felt cold spread through her limbs that had nothing to do with winter. Your wife, she whispered. And our children, he said. The room went still. I was away when it happened, he continued. Chasing warrants, doing the job I thought mattered. When I came back, there was nothing left but ash and bones, and a warrant with my name on it. For what murder? Arson. Treason, if you ask the wrong man. Michaela looked at him, really looked, at the scar along his jaw, at the weariness carved into his face, at the way his hands clenched and unclenched like they were still holding on to something long gone. You ran, she said. Yes. And now you're here. Yes. She turned away and crossed the room, pulled up the loose floorboard near the back wall. From beneath it, she drew out the tin box and set it on the table. Inside were Luis's letters, his careful handwriting, his sketches of support beams and air shafts, dates, warnings. Tomas pushed himself up on one elbow, ignoring the pain. Those marks, he said hoarsely. That's the same system. Same faults. Same pattern. Michaela nodded. He was scared. But he stayed. So did my Ruth, Thomas said. Their eyes met across the table, grief recognizing grief. Outside, something cracked in the snow. Thomas's head snapped toward the door. His body tensed despite the wound. Someone's been near, he said. Michaela followed his gaze. The firelight flickered. How do you know? Because the forest isn't breathing right. He swung his legs off the pallet, swaying. Michaela moved instinctively to steady him. You shouldn't, I need to see. They stepped to the door together. The cold rushed in as she opened it. Fresh tracks cut across the clearing. Horses, 3 of them. Thomas stared at the marks in the snow, his face hardening. They're close, he said, and they know where I am. Michaela closed her eyes once. Then she squared her shoulders. Then you'd better heal fast, she said, because this home is not empty anymore. Behind them, the children stood silent, and beyond the trees, the mountain watched. Of course, here's Chapter 4. Following the logic, continuity, and emotional tone established in the previous chapters, and adhering closely to your outline, including the quote, main quote. I've buried men with better manners than you don't mistake my silence for surrender. Dawn crept in pale and stubborn through the warped kitchen window, landing soft against Josie's tired hands as she poured herself a cup of weak coffee. Her back ached from sleeping on the stiff cot Elijah had carried into her room, claiming the new mattress would be arriving any day. She didn't believe him, not after last night. She'd stayed silent when he slammed the back door and threw his boots against the wall after riding in past midnight. She'd listened as he stomped through the house, muttering curses under his breath, then slammed the bedroom door to the master room where she wasn't allowed to sleep yet. Not till you learn some damn respect, he'd said the night before after she dared ask why he left her with chores but no checkbook. She sipped the coffee slowly, even though it was bitter. It was the only moment of quiet before the day unspooled like a fraying rope. May had offered her a lift to town after church, and Josie intended to take it. Not for groceries, she didn't have the money anyway, but for a moment of her own choosing. To walk where she wanted, speak with whomever she pleased, maybe send a letter she had tucked in her coat. Footsteps scraped behind her. She didn't turn. Elijah entered the kitchen with a presence that pushed the air ahead of him. He looked like sin, dressed up in Sunday boots, hat too crisp, eyes bloodshot from something stronger than whiskey. "You making breakfast?" he asked. She moved the kettle aside. "Coffee's all I had time for." "I've been washing your jeans since sunup." His eyes narrowed. "Don't get smart, Josie. A woman don't run her mouth like that." She turned, then slowly, deliberately, her shoulders squared. And a man doesn't treat his home like a saloon. His nostrils flared. "What did you just say to me?" I said. She placed the mug down firm, letting it clink just enough to show her hands were steady. "You don't scare me, Elijah. I've buried men with better manners than you. Don't mistake my silence for surrender." He took a slow step forward. "You forget whose roof you're under, I remember every night." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I remember who hauled me out of that train depot with sweet words and promises. I remember the ring you flashed in front of Reverend Taylor. But I also remember that marriage isn't ownership." "You're my wife," he growled. "I'm a person," she replied. A sharp silence filled the kitchen. Somewhere a rooster crowed like it hadn't heard what tension lived inside that house. "You want to make this hard?" he asked, stepping closer. "No," she said softly, brushing past him and grabbing her shawl from the hook. "But I won't make it easy either." He grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but enough to test. "Where you think you're going dressed like that?" She didn't flinch. "To church. Then into town with May." "You ain't got no business in town." "I've got a letter to mail," she said simply, "and last I checked the U.S. Postal Service didn't answer to you." He let go, but not before she saw something mean flicker in his eyes. The kind of mean that didn't shout. The kind that waited. The kind that planned. "I see what this is," he muttered. "You're stirring things up. You want May whispering in your ear, telling you lies about me." Josie opened the door, feeling the cold slap of air greet her like a friend. "I don't need May to see what's right in front of me." She left him standing there, steam curling from his untouched mug. At church, Josie sat between May and Miss Adeline, a widow with 3 grandsons and a spine like iron. The sermon was about forgiveness, of course it was, but Josie only half heard the preacher. Her eyes kept drifting toward the paper she kept folded in her coat pocket. It wasn't long, just a note to the postmaster in Abilene who handled the inheritance filings. She needed a copy of her grandmother's will. Elijah swore it didn't exist. She wasn't so sure anymore. May leaned in. "You all right?" Josie nodded, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "I didn't come all this way to shrink." "You don't have to handle this alone," May whispered. "I know," Josie whispered back. "But I have to start acting like I remember who I was before he tried to change me." After service, they walked together toward the buggy. Elijah was nowhere in sight. Josie was grateful for that, but also unsettled. The air felt like something held its breath. "Let's stop at the post office," Josie said, voice low. May nodded and clicked her tongue to get the mule moving. Inside, the clerk was kind but cautious. "You sayin' you're the granddaughter of Miss Edna Clare?" "I am," Josie said. "Born Josephine Clare, took his name after the wedding. But I've got her papers, and I believe there was a will. I need to know who filed it." The man scratched his beard. "That name got pulled up not too long ago. Some man came in asking about her estate, said he was the husband. Didn't have no legal documents, though." Josie felt the heat in her chest. "Did he give a name?" He squinted. "Elijah Rowe, I believe." May's mouth went tight. Josie steadied herself. "Can you send the filing to me directly? If you give me a proper address and proof of relation, I'll see what I can do." Josie nodded. "I'll get the documents." As they stepped outside, wind kicked dust up from the street, and somewhere across the way she caught sight of Elijah's silhouette leaning against the general store wall. Watching. Waiting. "He followed us," May whispered. Josie didn't answer. She already knew. Back at the buggy, May gave her a look. "You sure about going back with him tonight?" "I can't leave yet. Not till I've got that copy." May exhaled hard. "Then you stay sharp, Josie. You hear me? He ain't dumb, and he's getting more careful." Josie nodded and climbed into the buggy, hands clenched around the folded letter like it was the last match in a dark room. As they passed by Elijah on their way out of town, he didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there smiling like the devil. But Josie didn't look away. She stared straight ahead and whispered under her breath, "You can lie to the town, but you can't rewrite my blood." The road ahead was long, and the worst of it hadn't yet shown its teeth. But she'd already started digging her way out. And once a woman starts digging, there's no telling what truth she'll unearth. The snow had softened into a hush outside, falling like feathers over the hills, while inside the cabin warmth from the fire licked gently against the stones. Clara leaned forward, elbow on her knee chin, resting on her palm, staring at the little notebook cradled in her lap. There were 3 names in it now, hers, the baby's, and Delbert's, each circled, connected with tiny arrows. She wasn't sure what made her write them that way, but it felt like drawing a thread through all their hearts. Across the room, Delbert was humming low, almost unconscious of it, as he folded the baby's clean blanket again and again with rough, careful hands. Ruth had slipped out at dawn to chop more kindling before the snow came thick, her strength quiet but unwavering. For a girl who'd barely spoken the day before, she'd looked Clara straight in the eye this morning and said, "I'm staying." Staying meant something different now. It wasn't just survival. It wasn't just a roof and a fire. It meant belonging. And it was still so new that Clara didn't quite know where to put the feeling. It made her throat tight. "I never thought silence could be a kind of language," she murmured aloud, not looking up. "But the way this place holds quiet, it's like God set it aside for healing." Delbert chuckled under his breath and stood. "Out here, the loudest voices are wind and fire. Everything else is borrowed time." Clara glanced at him. "You always talk like that." He shrugged, walking over with 2 mugs. One for her, one for himself. Only when folks start listening. The tea was strong and bitter with a sweetness that surprised her. She looked down into the steam and breathed deep. "Delbert," she began, voice cautious, "last night when I asked about the girl. Was it your wife?" He didn't flinch. He nodded once. "And daughter." Clara swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. She had a cry like a bluebird," he said after a long silence. "High and sweet. That baby, my Daisy, she never even made it to her 2nd birthday." Clara said nothing. Words would have made it worse. He didn't go on, just stood with his face to the window eyes, distant, like he was still waiting for them to come walking down the hill one day. Clara set her mug aside and stood. She crossed to him, slow and deliberate. She didn't touch him. Something in him still flinched from that, but she stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder. "You ever wonder," she said softly, "if you were put in a place because someone else was praying for you?" Delbert turned his head, eyes narrowing slightly. She went on. "I used to pray for someone. When I was little, I didn't know who. I just knew they were out there. Lost, hurting. I prayed they'd find peace, and maybe you were praying too. And somehow we all ended up in this hollow." Delbert didn't answer right away, but his jaw unclenched a little. The baby cried from the back bedroom, and Clara moved quickly, already knowing the rhythm of his fuss. He was hungry, not scared. As she lifted him gently, he curled into her chest, like he'd known her for years. Ruth appeared in the doorway with her coat dusted in snow. "It's turning fast," she said. "By sundown, we'll be iced in. We'll keep the fire going," Clara said. "We've got enough supplies?" Ruth nodded. "Barely." That afternoon passed with the rhythm of the storm pressing in tighter. The snow thickened against the window panes, sealing them in like a cave. Clara cooked a pot of stew from what was left in the root cellar, and the scent of onions, carrots, and broth warmed every crack of the small cabin. She let Ruth stir the pot while she held the baby close to her chest, rocking slow and humming a song she barely remembered learning. Delbert had gone quiet again. He took his coffee on the porch, even as snow clung to his shoulders and lashes. Clara found herself watching him from the window, and when he finally stepped inside, stomping the cold from his boots, she said quietly, "You don't have to hold your grief outside like it's unwelcome." Delbert blinked. "What?" She set the baby down and met his gaze. "Grief's a long tenant. If we don't give it a chair by the fire, it'll haunt the hallway." He stared at her long and deep, like she'd read a page he didn't know he'd written. Then slowly he moved to the hearth and sat. "The ones who hurt us the most," Clara whispered, "are often the ones who never let themselves be loved." Delbert nodded, once the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Then I guess I've hurt myself more than anyone else ever could." The baby stirred, but didn't wake. Ruth was curled in the corner, now asleep, with her knees tucked under her chin, one hand still around the ladle. The snow tapped against the walls like gentle fingers. Outside, the world was frozen. Inside, something was beginning to thaw. "I think you kept this place for more than memory," Clara said. "I think you kept it because you needed someone to show up. Someone you didn't have to ask for." Delbert leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "I didn't expect it to be you." Clara smiled. "Neither did I." He glanced toward the cradle. "That baby. He yours, no, but he's mine now." Delbert looked at her quiet again. "You don't need to ask what happened," she said. "Just know that they didn't value him, and they never really saw me either." He gave a slow nod. Then they were fools twice over. For a long moment there was only the crackle of the fire. Then Delbert spoke again. "You know what I think? What's that? I think this place, this hollow, this mountain, it's not just a shelter. It's a crossroads. A place where broken things stop pretending they ain't broken, and where people find out what they still got left." Clara exhaled. "Then maybe we still have time to build something." His voice was quiet, but steady. "I never learned how to start again." Clara reached down and picked up a length of yarn she'd been twining earlier. "Then we start small. A stitch, a breath, a bowl of stew, a baby's cry. We start with today." He nodded. "Today's as good as any." As evening fell, Ruth stirred her eyes, darting around like she forgot where she was. Clara reached over and touched her hand gently. "You're safe. We're here." Ruth didn't speak, but she laid her head back down, this time on Clara's lap. Delbert added another log to the fire, his movements slow and methodical. Outside, the storm howled harder, but the cabin stood strong, weathered, but standing. And inside, the three of them, four counting the baby, settled into the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. The tea, the fire, the soft breathing of a child. It wasn't healing all at once, but it was how healing began. Morning light pressed soft and gold through the frost-rimmed window, settling like a hush across the cabin floor. It touched the cradle first, where the baby stirred with a sleepy gurgle, then crept toward the hearth, where embers still glowed in the quiet aftermath of night. Clara sat at the table with her hands curled around a mug, gone lukewarm, watching Ruth scrape peeled potatoes into a bowl with methodical calm. There was a quietness to Ruth's movements that Clara had come to respect. Not silence out of fear, but silence from someone who'd had to grow older than her age and learn how to disappear inside a room. Today, though, there was something lighter in the girl's shoulders. She wasn't vanishing. She was settling in. Delbert pushed open the door, cold gust trailing behind him like a cape. His coat was dusted in white beard rimed with frost. Woodpile held, he grunted. But barely. Storm kicked harder than I figured. Clara stood to take his gloves, hanging them by the fire. "You get any sleep?" He nodded toward the cradle. "Same as him whenever I could." She smiled softly, then said, "I was thinking. Once things thaw a little, we might head to town. Refill the pantry, get some oats, maybe find someone who can tell me how to make that sourdough starter not smell like an old boot." Delbert gave a slow smile. "You're planning to stay then?" Clara met his eyes and didn't flinch. "We're not leaving you, Delbert." He nodded, looking toward the hearth, then back to her. "Then I'd best fix that broken shutter before the wind takes it clean off." As he stepped back outside, Ruth spoke up. "He talks more to you." Clara turned, drying her hands on her apron. "He's trying. His way." Ruth looked down. "He scares me less now." Clara's voice was gentle. That's because you've seen past the edge of him. A man like Delbert is like a ridge you think you'll fall off, but once you get over it, there's meadow on the other side. The day passed in small things. Clara mended socks and re-hemmed one of Ruth's dresses. Delbert worked on the cabin's shutters and checked the traps down the ridge, and Ruth carried the baby on her hip like it was the most natural thing in the world. By late afternoon, clouds began to gather again, low and woolen. Delbert came in from the barn, his face grim. Tracks near the edge of the woods. Clara stood. Animal too heavy, too regular. Boots. A tension passed between them like a wire drawn tight. Could just be someone passing through, Clara offered. Delbert's jaw twitched. Or someone looking for what they think they lost. Clara scooped the baby up her arms, instinctively protective. We'll stay inside tonight. Delbert nodded. I'll keep watch. Evening fell in layers. Delbert sat near the fire rifle across his lap, while Ruth dozed with the baby swaddled against her chest. Clara made coffee and didn't bother asking if anyone could sleep. Sometime deep into the night, a knock rattled the door, sharp, fast, twice. Delbert stood without a word, already moving. Clara caught her breath and stepped forward, one hand on Ruth's shoulder. The girl's eyes flew open, and she gripped the baby tighter. Delbert opened the door, only a crack rifle just behind the frame. A man stood on the porch, wrapped in a threadbare coat, breath rising in puffs. Behind him, two other men Clara didn't recognize shifted their weight impatiently. We're looking for a woman, the man said. Slim, maybe with a kid or two. Seen anyone pass this way? Clara didn't breathe. Delbert didn't blink. Ain't seen a soul but the wind. You sure? The man pressed. They took something that don't belong to them. Delbert's tone dropped. This is private land. Storm's coming. I'd suggest moving on before it pins you down. The man squinted. You live out here alone, Delbert didn't answer. After a long moment, the men backed away. If you see her, the first said, she ain't what she seems. She's a liar, a thief. Delbert's voice was low. So am I. Now go. The door shut firm. Clara exhaled, knees weak. Delbert turned to her. You recognize them, she nodded. The middle one. He's the one who tried to take the baby. Said he had some claim over him. His father, maybe. I don't know. But he's not safe. Delbert walked to the window, peering into the dark. They'll be back. Clara hugged the baby to her chest, heart thudding. What are we going to do? Delbert turned, voice like carved stone. Some folks don't come to make peace. They come to sniff out the life you built and set fire to it, just to watch it burn. Ruth stood slowly, not shaking, not afraid anymore. Then we build something stronger. Delbert looked at her, really looked, and nodded once. They spent the next day readying the cabin. Reinforcing the doors, gathering the traps and tools, hiding the sled in the trees beyond the ridge. Delbert scouted the perimeter again and again, tracking snow for prints, listening for signs. Inside, Clara packed food into jars and bundles, loading what she could into sacks in case they needed to leave fast. She didn't want to run, but she wasn't going to let anyone take this child. Or Ruth. Or this small piece they'd carved from the mountain. That night she sat beside Delbert by the fire, her hands red from the cold, her eyes searching his. You sure we shouldn't just leave? He shook his head. You ran before. They think you'll run again. That's how they win. Clara hesitated. I'm tired of running. He reached over and touched her hand gently. Then don't. They watched the flames crackle and dance. The baby slept in Ruth's arms, and the silence held thick and sacred between them. Outside, the woods breathed and whispered, but the cabin stood firm. And inside, so did they. The wind carried a different kind of cold that morning, one that didn't come from the mountains or the sky. It came from knowing. Clara felt it in her bones as she stood at the cabin window, eyes tracing the tree line where tracks had been yesterday and gone by nightfall. The baby whimpered against her chest, restless even in sleep, while Ruth spooned oatmeal into a bowl without saying much. Delbert hadn't come in from his rounds. He'd gone out early with his rifle, and a coil of rope said something about checking the bluff again. That had been hours ago. He should have come back by now, Ruth said quietly, voice tight. Clara's grip around the child stiffened. Maybe he circled farther out. If he saw those men again. Ruth's eyes met hers. You think they got to him? Clara's stomach twisted. No, she said. I think Delbert's not the kind of man who gets taken. Not without leaving a mark. Still, the silence outside gnawed at her. She bundled the baby tighter and reached for the coat Delbert had left hanging by the door. Ruth stepped forward. You're not going alone. Clara's glance was firm. If something happens, you stay. You lock the door. You keep him safe. Promise me. I'm not hiding, Ruth snapped. I'm not asking you to hide, Clara said, voice low. I'm asking you to survive. There's a difference. She opened the door and stepped into the brittle morning. Snow crunched beneath her boots, powder thick along the path Delbert had taken. She followed it down the ridge, each footfall louder than the last in the hush of winter's grip. It was nearly a mile before she saw something, an old pine with bark slashed fresh and ragged. Then a drop of red, and another. Not a lot, just enough to pull the breath from her chest. She kept walking. Near the frozen stream, she saw the tracks split. Delbert's boots veered left, while another pair, heavier, wider, cut right. She followed Delbert's. Then she saw him. He was slumped against a tree, one hand to his shoulder, blood blooming through his sleeve like a stubborn flower. His rifle lay in the snow, half buried. Delbert, she dropped to her knees beside him, voice shaking. What happened? He grimaced but managed a rasp. One of 'em. He was waiting. Didn't expect me to move so fast. You're hurt. Clipped. Bullet grazed. Nothing deep. He winced as she helped him sit straighter. She tore off her scarf and pressed it to the wound. We've got to get you home. They'll circle back, he warned. They saw me alone. Think the cabin's unguarded. Clara's eyes narrowed. Let them. Together they made their way back, slow and silent. Delbert leaned on her more than he'd ever admit, and Clara bore the weight without flinching. Snow stirred from branches above, falling like ash. When they reached the cabin, Ruth opened the door before Clara could knock. Her eyes locked on Delbert's wound, then flicked to Clara's face. They're coming, aren't they? Clara nodded. Soon. Inside, Clara cleaned the wound, her hands steady though her insides quaked. Delbert didn't say much. He gritted through the pain, eyes burning more from frustration than anything else. They're not here for talk, he said. They'll come after dark. They'll wait for silence. Clara stood. Then we won't give them silence. That afternoon, Clara and Ruth made noise. They stoked the fire too high. They rattled pans and boiled broth. Clara sang to the baby in a voice that cracked but didn't quit. Every window glowed. Delbert sat with his rifle across his lap, bandaged arm cradled against his side. I've spent a long time keeping quiet, Clara said softly as she packed a small bag with essentials. Even before I ran, I was disappearing in rooms, shrinking, apologizing for taking up space. Delbert didn't look up. But now they know where I am, she continued, and I won't run again. If they want to come, let them come. Delbert finally turned. You sound like someone who knows what she's worth. I do now. Night fell slow and heavy. Clouds thickened above the ridge. The cabin's light spilled out into the dark like a dare. Ruth lit the oil lamp and set it near the front window. They'll see it. Clara nodded. Good. They waited. It was close to midnight when the sound came a crunch outside, careful and deliberate. Clara picked up the bag and moved toward the back, where the root cellar hatch opened out beneath the cabin floorboards. She handed it to Ruth. If something happens, I know, Ruth said, lips pressed white. But you're not staying out here alone, Clara shook her head. I'm not alone. Then came the knock. Soft, calculated, like they knew. Clara stepped toward the door and called out, "This land's private." The voice answered, smug. "We're not here for your land. Just what's ours." She met Delbert's eyes. He nodded once. Clara's voice rose. "Nothing in here belongs to you." "You don't want trouble," the man warned. "I've already had trouble, now I want peace, but I'll fight for it if I have to." Silence. Then the door burst inward. But Clara had moved fast, pulled the latch on the trap door behind her, giving Ruth and the baby cover. She and Delbert stood ready. His rifle cracked first, splintering the doorframe, a warning shot. The intruders staggered, surprised by the ferocity. One man lunged, but Clara swung the iron poker from the hearth, hit him square in the chest, and knocked him to the ground. Delbert fired again, missing the second by inches, but it was enough. The rest scrambled back into the snow, dragging their wounded man. Clara followed them to the door, poker still in hand. "You want something," she shouted into the dark. "Come back in daylight. Bring a sheriff. Bring the law. But if you come at night again, you'd best write your name in the snow before you do, because you won't leave a trace." Only the wind answered. She shut the door, bolted it, and turned. Delbert looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. She let the poker fall, hands shaking, now knees buckling under the weight of adrenaline and fear. Delbert caught her before she hit the ground. They slid to the floor together, breathing hard. Ruth emerged from the trap door, pale but composed, the baby asleep in her arms. "We made it," she whispered. Delbert looked to Clara, and then to the window where the firelight flickered against the glass. His voice was low. "Sometimes you don't fight to win. You fight to remind the darkness it's not welcome here." And that night, the darkness learned to back down. The educational lesson learned from this story is that courage doesn't always roar. It sometimes speaks in steady hands, firm boundaries, and the quiet refusal to be pushed aside. When you've spent a lifetime being overlooked or underestimated, standing your ground can be the greatest declaration of worth. This story reminds us that even late in life, it's never too late to protect your peace, draw a line, and say, enough. Sometimes survival is not just enduring, but reclaiming the right to live without fear.